I am Kathryn Kidder. Today is July 7th, 2020, and I'm with Peg Davidson. Peg, would you please say and spell your full name, including your maiden name?
Margaret May Davidson.
Okay, you want to spell May and Tewinkle?
Tewinkle. Maytewinkel.
Okay, and say the whole name again.
Margaret May Tewinkle Davidson.
Okay, thank you. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this recorded oral history.
My pleasure.
We are here to talk about the Agricultural Women's Club, associated with the University of Florida, founded in 1908 and disbanded this year in 2020. But first, we would like to know a little bit more about you. So where and when were you born?
I was born November 28th, 1937, in Coulee City, Washington.
Would you spell that name?
Coulee.
Okay, and were you born in a hospital or at home?
No, I was not born in a hospital, and I wasn't born at home. I was born in, it was another, I'm not sure what they called it, but it was a birthing place. And it was small. This was a very small community. My dad worked on the Coulee Dam, and that's why we were there. So
And
you could say, I suppose.
Was your mother attended by a physician or a midwife?
Yes, by a physician.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and your parents' names?
My dad's name was Maurice Asa Tewinkle. My mother's name was Harriet Lorena Cruz Tewinkle.
Okay.
Kruse.
Okay, and where were they originally from?
They were from Rockford, Washington, a small farming community. And they lived in that, they were both raised in that area. They knew each other all their life.
So
the people that dated. Pardon?
Were your grandparents also natives of that area?
Yes, they were. Mm-hmm.
And what were their names?
On my mother's side, it was Margaret Cruz, and his name was Fred Cruz. On my dad's side was, my dad's father was Asa, A-S-A, Tewinkle, and my grandmother's name was Emma. And she died in the flu epidemic of 1918 and left 5 children for my grandfather to raise.
Well,
he had his hands full.
Yes, the history comes around, huh? So your roots are very deep in Washington.
Not really. No, we left Washington when I was 3 years old. Drove across the United States in March to New York City and got on a ship and went to Panama. So I was raised in Panama. That's my growing up.
Okay. Well, you'll have lots to tell us about that. So, what was your home like in Panama?
The first place we lived on both sides of the isthmus. The first time we lived on the Atlantic side, we lived in Margarita, and we always lived in government housing. You could not own your own home. We lived in government housing. It was a fourplex. It did not have screens. We had mosquito netting at night. That was the first place I remembered. And then we moved to a duplex while we were there in Margarita, and lived there until I was in second grade. And we moved to the other side of the isthmus, to the Pacific side. And that's where I spent the rest of my growing up years. First living in Diablo, which you could watch the canal. You could see the canal, and we saw the ships going through during the Second World War. I remember having, of course, we all had blackouts. I think you even had them in the States. And but we had air raids, and my mother made me a gas mask to wear that looked like a bunny. So these are just a few memories I have that come to my mind.
Well, you had an unusual childhood, and we can talk a little more. But first of all, why were you there?
My dad did not have any formal education except through high school. He started college, but then his older brother wanted to go, so my dad did not go. And he had worked one time for the forestry department in Oregon, and this was before he and my mom were married. Then he was offered a job in Epicoli City, working on the dam. My dad was self-taught in all that he did, and he had quite a fascinating life. I wish you could have interviewed him. But he just tells a story that there was an offer for men that wanted to go to Panama with their family, that they needed people to work there. And so my dad went down with my mom drove across the country, and in the back seat there was I with my mom's sewing machine, and that was it. And it was quite a story.
What year was that, Peg?
That was 1941. Can you imagine two farm people taking that risk, going across the United States in March and getting on a ship and going to a foreign country? And shortly after they got there, the war broke out. And being in Panama, of course, was a terrible place to be because it was highly desired, the canal. But my dad started working on the canal. He did a lot of work with the transit. He did a lot of measuring and worked on the canal. Was already built, of course, but there was a lot of work that always had to be done. He ended up, he was a cartographer and did map making and put in tide gauges all over in every Latin country. Had a very exciting life, but that's sort of in the future. My mother also, anyone that went to Panama after the war broke out, which was shortly after they got there, went to work, and she worked for the Army. I thought that was fascinating too, to be that young, a woman, and working full time. And so she did that. She worked for the finance company, and she had gone to school after she graduated from high school, and got a a degree in, just went to a business college that they used to call them for a year or something, but got enough background that she was very savvy. And so she did that. And so I had my parents never referred to our help as maids. They referred to them as people that helped us. And there was a lady, a woman named Myrtle, that took care of me. One of my fondest memories of that time was learning to roller skate. And my dad, every day when he came home from work, I'd put that that key around my neck, and we'd go roller skating. So that was a good memory.
So you must have had sidewalks or roads that were suitable?
We did have sidewalks. We had sidewalks. It was a nice little community. We had we had roads, and now you couldn't drive very far at that time because the road had not been completed across the isthmus. I think we drove about 20 miles, and that was as far as we could drive. It was also the place on the Atlantic side where I learned to swim. I learned to swim in a saltwater pool. It was by a very nice hotel owned it, the Washington Hotel, and we were very good friends with the people who ran it. And when the tide was in, you could swim. When the tide was out, the pool was empty. So it was a really interesting concept, but a lot of fun.
That is really a saltwater pool, not the kind they have now where they put some saline, make it saline content.
That's right. It was a saltwater pool.
And who was your instructor then? Did your family teach you? Who was your swimming instructor?
Probably my dad or my mom.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they knew how to swim, and so that kind of went along there.
Well, you talked about a bit about your earliest memories. Are there other things that you recall before you started school?
No, not particularly. Can't think of anything. I just had the normal childhood, played outside all the time with the other children, and had a very normal, thank goodness, childhood. Parents that were very responsible.
Your schooling was provided by the government as well.
Yes.
What was that like?
When we moved to Diablo, and that was before second grade. We must have moved there when I was starting first grade, really. It was fine. We lived in a duplex that I said, I believe, that you could look out and see the canal. And so my childhood, I walked to school. I think we probably had about 20 in my classes. So that was when I was in second grade. I always wanted to get my ears pierced, of course, because living there, most children did. And of course, my mother, said no. And I used to stop at the dispensary on the way home from school, and I would ask the nurse if she would pierce my ears, and she always said no. So this one day I walked by, and I was in second grade, and I stopped and I asked her, and she said, "Let me call your mother, Margaret May." So she called my mom, and she said, "Harriet, Margaret May wants to have her ears pierced." And my mother said, okay, I'll be down. So my mom came down, walked down, got my ears pierced. And you know what day that was? The day the war was over. The day the Second World War was over. My mother, it's one of those things I just happen to remember, because I remember my mother and the nurse talking, and they didn't believe it. They thought that there was a mix-up, but there wasn't. The war was over, and then we got to see some of the ships. We always would go down and watch the ships come through and wave to the sailors, and they'd throw their hats to us and all that. So it was a pretty exciting time. I grew up with someone that you know, I think.
The Townsends.
Frank Townsend.
Uh-huh.
His father was my Santa Claus at the church we went to. So
gave out gifts.
Pardon me?
Gave out gifts to children and
yes, and just I have quite a Santa collection, and it started there, not with Frank, not with Mr. Townsend, but with somebody else that gave me one, and so yeah, I remember him very well, both he and his mother, and then of course Frank went on to he came to Stillwater. He was at Stillwater, and then while we were there, and then came here after we moved here, not to follow Jim, but just happened to follow. So that was kind of an interesting little side story.
From very early on, you knew
very
him.
early on. Yes. I knew him. Yes.
Yeah. So you had some kind of Christmas parties and
always. My mother celebrated, and I'm sure that's where because I do the same thing, but she celebrated every holiday. And 4th of July was one of the very most special. And I remember my dad would take me into Panama City to buy firecrackers. When I was very young, we would go down there and get firecrackers. And so it was a special time. But my mother, I remember at Christmas, she had a crepe paper brick. They were bricks that put into crepe paper. And we always had a fireplace that she made. And we always had a Christmas tree, and, Santa Claus always came. I even got a new bike one year that I found out years later that my dad had found and had taken and had it completely repainted. And, but, just things like that. Had a very, normal childhood, but different living there. And and we're still, the friends that I had there, we're still very close. I call my girlfriends a couple times a year that I was very close to, and they live in New Mexico and Colorado and Tennessee and Florida. And we get together for reunions, which are absolutely fantastic.
So were there Panamanian children in your school, and what kind of relationship did you have with?
Wonderful. Some of my closest friends were Panamanians. We had a wonderful relationship. I didn't know, being a child growing up, you don't know about your parents, other kids' parents and all. You're friends. And I had no idea that they had to pay to go to school there. There was a tuition, unless their parents worked for the government. And if your parents worked for the government, you could go to school there. Balboa High School. We had a great high school. We had a football team. We played the other side of the isthmus. That's what would be fun. We would take the train over at night and then play the game and come back on the train, which was exciting. And so just a lot of, it was, to me, it was very normal. Everything was. My parents never stressed that where you're living it's very different or anything. To me, it was coming to the States was what was difficult.
Why?
Well, for one thing, I had to learn to iron.
Oh.
I had to learn to cook. I had not done those things. I think I was privileged and didn't know it in certain areas. I know after we had two of our children and my parents brought us down there for Christmas one year. And when Jim left, he said, Peg, you lived in a fairy tale. This is not the real world. I didn't know that. Some of my Panamanian friends would be chauffeured to school with their initials on the side of the limousine that brought them to school, but we never thought about those things. That was just normal. And, most of us lived, our parents were government employees, and that's just the way it was.
Did you speak Spanish?
Poquito. And now I don't at all, because my friends wanted to speak English. They wanted to work. They wanted to speak English, and I spoke Spanish. I mean, I didn't go into Panama City a lot because certain parts of it were definitely off limits, and but I did go in, and we do shopping and things like that. And, so I learned, I could converse, but most people spoke English because they wanted to. Now my dad spoke fluent Spanish and fluent Portuguese, and he looked very Latin. He had an olive complexion and white hair, and just later on, and he was very Spanish looking. So.
When you were in high school, were you in some activities?
Yes. I was never really in a lot of clubs. But I was in a special chorus, and we sang at different places, and I sang it and did that. And I was in I'd have to get my yearbook out. I was in a couple more clubs, but we had a very active social life. I was in Rainbows, which was part of an organization with Eastern Star. I was very involved in Rainbows, and the guys had DeMolays. I was very involved in that. Mm-hmm. So, I was in Brownies and Girl Scouts, and my mother was a Brownie leader. She wasn't a Brownie leader, but she was a Girl Scout leader. I learned how to sew. I did all those things. I loved to sew and that type thing. So it was just a wonderful life. And I had a sister that was 10 years younger than me that has passed away. So that was, but we had very close friendships, extremely close. When I share some of my experiences with some of my friends. They have a hard time realizing that I had that many friends that I'm still, not that I had that many friends, but I'm still friends with them. But
that was really a wonderful and special childhood that you
yeah, it was.
fortunate to have.
We came to the States a couple times. My mother and I did. Once when I was in second grade, my mom and I came and we stopped in Mexico and we were bumped off the plane and for a few days, and then I got sick. And I thought, I can't believe my mother was able to handle all this and do what she did. But she was very strong, and so was my dad. And we went out to spoke to Washington after we finally got to the States. We were in Louisiana, New Orleans. We got a Greyhound bus and went by bus out to Spokane, Washington. That first time. The second time, which was my most wonderful summer that I remember, I was in fourth grade. And we went and stayed with my grandparents. I never knew my relatives very well because I was never there. But we spent the whole summer with them. And they had outdoor plumbing, which I just thought was marvelous. My mother, she said, now Margaret May, when you go back home, you don't tell anybody we had outdoor. But to me, it was fascinating, the whole thing was just, but this was a long time ago. You stop and think. And, but I loved that summer. My grandpa had cows and pigs and horses, and I was in heaven, I wanted to stay there. I didn't want to go back home. But that was a good memory.
What year was that?
Oh, gee, I don't know. We came to the States again in 1949. I was in seventh grade, and we lived there. My mother and sister and I were there for a year. My dad traveled a lot. He worked for Inter-American Geodetic Survey and did a lot of mapping and traveled all over Latin America. So this one particular time we came to the States and stayed for a year. So that was 1949, and I was in seventh grade. So backtrack to fourth grade. It was in the early 40s.
After the war,
40s.
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you envision your future at that time? Would you have thought of staying in Panama, or what would you have thought about doing?
I never really thought about it. I never even thought about the future. But when I got to be a senior in high school, I knew everybody went to college that I knew. You didn't even think of. I never liked school. School was not my favorite thing to do ever. But it's not that I didn't like to learn. I just didn't like school. And had to start thinking about college. That's what you did. So I chose a couple places. One was Colorado, University of Colorado, and the other one was Oregon State. And I thought about going to the University of Florida, but this sounds strange, but it was almost too close to home. I've always been sort of adventurous. I never felt like I had to live close to home. So my parents had lived in Oregon at one time and talked about it a lot. I thought, well, that would be a good place to go. So I chose that over University of Colorado. Thank goodness I did, because that's where I met Jim.
So your parents did they have education? Education was a priority in your family?
Mm-hmm.
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 Not only your classmates.
I didn't even think about. Something came up on here that says, I've got a red spot up there in me. Can you see it?
No, I'm not getting that. It looks okay.
Okay. So anyway, where were we?
College. Your college.
I went to college, and one night I was sitting there talking to this good friend of mine who I just talked to a couple of weeks ago, that long ago. And that I've known her that long. And we were talking one night, and you would talk about the kind of person you want to marry and all this. And she said, there's somebody I want you to meet. She said, I used to date him. She said, we were just good friends. Well, it turned out to be Jim. And that was in March of my freshman year. He was a senior. And that took care of my college.
So you were married soon.
Well, I came home for the summer. I went back to Panama for the summer, and then went back to the States, got a job in Portland, Oregon, and working for the phone company. And that friend that introduced me to Jim, she came, and this other girl came, and the three of us lived in an apartment until we were married. That was I was in school. I went to college. I graduated in 55. So then I went up there, and then came back in 1956. Went to Portland, and in 1957 we were married. And it's pouring down rain here right now.
It's
Thank
summer.
goodness. Oh, I love it.
Yeah. So was Jim the reason you ended up in Gainesville after not choosing the University of Florida?
Yes. Well, we came here after he was at Oregon State. He did his bachelor's and master's there, and we were married after he'd been in the master's program 1 year. We were married, had another year, lived in a reconverted woodshed that had been converted for the military when they came back to school at the end of the Second World War. And it was a wonderful experience. The people we rented from, I used her washing machine. And I mean, it was just one of those wonderful periods in your life. When he got his master's, we went to Davis, California. Went to work, Jim did, under a Professor Don Nielsen. It couldn't have been was that a good match at a good time. And he thought he wanted to go on for his PhD, and Don convinced him that he should, and he did at UC Davis. And we were there for 7 years and had our 3 children. And when we got ready to graduate, we were looking at jobs, and there was one in California that we went down and looked at Irvine, and it was a very prestigious person to work with. He was internationally known, but we didn't want to raise our family in California. So we interviewed for the job in Oklahoma, and the job was, we took the bus from California to Oklahoma, just the two of us, and ended up taking the job at Oklahoma State. And his professor was very disappointed that Jim did not take the one with the University of California, because it was a very nice position to have. And Don really wanted Jim to do it, but Jim said no. He said, I don't want to raise my kids there. So we were at Oklahoma for 9 years at Stillwater. Couldn't have picked a better place to go to raise our children at that time. It was great. It was a small community. And you lived there, didn't you?
Yes, for 3 years.
That's what I thought. Did Jerry do his PhD there, or what?
At Oklahoma State, yes.
Yeah. I was sure you lived there. So anyway, we were there, and then we came to Florida on sabbatical for a year. Really liked it. We had a great time. Got to do a lot because we were just going to be here for a year, and then went back to Oklahoma, and we were just there a very short time, and Jim received a call, and they were offering a position here, and we really had to think hard and long about it, because we had a daughter who was going to be a junior in high school, and that was we knew would be a hard move, but we decided to come, and I never ever thought I would be living in, I call this pretty close to tropics. I didn't think I would ever be living in this again. And even after we moved here, I didn't think we would be here for forever. But here it is, 40 some years later, 44 years later, and it's home.
And we're just in the midst of a tropical rain for your benefit.
That's right.
Bring back memories.
Brings back great memories, yes.
Yeah. So when you were here on sabbatical, did you learn about the the Agricultural Women's Club at that point, or was it later?
I had learned about, and I meant to go back and check before I talked to you what it was called, but there was something in Stillwater, and I was part of that. That was my really first experience with an agricultural club for women, and it was very loosely run, but it was great, and I had good relationships, and we basically what we did, it was social. It was all social. And it was what I needed at that time. I had small children. I needed that relationship. I never lived close to parents, and so I had to rely on good relationships. And it was a great period for me during that time. And then we moved to so basically that was social and interaction with professors' wives, which was great because we got a glimpse of what it would be like. And then we moved to Florida, to Gainesville, and became active with Ag Women on sort of a limited basis, because our children were at an age where we felt like we had to really make them feel like they belonged. We had a lot of responsibility with them. We were involved. Jim was president of the band, and we were involved with them. But we also did do ag women things. We went to functions were great. There was always something fun to go to, and we were involved in that. And so that was really very good. It was very positive, and really enjoyed it. It was good. It was great. Had some good friends. Met good people. It was social, and it was great having that. When you move to a place and you don't know very many people. I know the Manzels found us a place when we moved here on sabbatical, and just different people that we became involved with, and so it was good. It was very good. It was very needed. It was very needed.
Do you remember if someone in particular introduced you to the organization, or did you sort of fall into it?
It was probably her last name, Louise Schmidt, because she talked me into bowling. And I think that was one of the things ag women did, or anyway, she got me involved in that. And then pretty soon, she would keep after me to do, why don't you come to this? Why don't you come? So we started going. And so Louise was probably responsible for that. And so we started, we went to things out at Lake Waburn, and, and just different social things. It was very good.
So the social activities were not just for women? Were the families involved?
Yeah, I remember them more as family activities. Yes, doing things like that. Really, we had different parties, and Valentine parties and Christmas parties, and those type things. Mm-hmm. Up until Jim passed away. Really, I mean, we were still active with doing different social things, and so that was good. Some of his responsibilities changed, and so it was difficult sometimes to do. You had to make choices what to do. And then I was never really involved with. I never had a office or anything in ag women, but I served on. I served on a lot of committees and to do things, and that was always fun. So there was always something to do.
So those committees were to organize the events?
Mm-hmm. Yes, to organize events, right. Yeah, that's what I probably enjoyed that as much as anything. I've always liked to plan things and do that type of thing. So that was good.
So if you said Lake Waburg, that would have been a picnic, family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, one of my daughters, our anniversary was a couple of weeks ago, and they put on Facebook. I don't go to Facebook unless one of them says check something out on Facebook, so I go and look. But there was a picture of Jim and I, and with our first granddaughter, and it was at Lake Waburn for a picnic. So that brought back a memory right away. And I haven't been there for a long time. I drive by it quite often, but I've never pulled in, and it's probably not open now with the virus. I'm sure it's closed. So all the students gone.
Do you remember the, I don't know if you would have been here for the 75th. I don't even remember when the 75th anniversary was, but the 100th anniversary, were you involved in that at all?
I don't believe so. You know, I will tell you, once Jim got into administration, there were a lot of places we had to go out of Gainesville. We did a lot of traveling, and there was a lot of things we missed because there were other obligations that needed to be done. It's just kind of the way it went. And I do know when Jim was asked to be vice president, one of the things that Dr. Lombardi wanted was he wanted me to be with him traveling. He wanted us to really be in the state a lot. So that took care of a lot of responsibility, or a lot of things that we would have liked to have done here at home, maybe. We were out in the state doing, or other places. And it was great. I mean, it was a wonderful, wonderful thing. It was, we met a lot of fantastic people, but our lives change. You know, your life changes as you go along. It just, if it doesn't, we probably don't really grow. So
you mentioned the we of this. That was a lot of the part of the women of our era was the expectation of
yes,
working with your husband, supporting your husband in his career and making that work for him.
Very true.
You're saying that you were actually asked to be a serious part. I know a lot of wives had to entertain and things like that.
Oh yeah. And we did that, and we loved having people. We loved having people in the house. I don't. When I say that, I don't say that in a negative tone at all. When we were asked, because it was great. It was a compliment to me to be able to do that. I always supported Jim in whatever he did, and he supported me. So it was never a hindrance. We loved having people at our home. We loved entertaining. We had people stay with us. Well, you know, Suresh and Keikos lived with us for a few weeks. We had people from Russia come and stay with us with their family that spoke no English, live with us. And so we were always doing that type of thing because that's what we enjoyed. So that's kind of the way it went. And I personally think I lived in a great period. I liked to do what I was doing. That was so I was very fortunate, I feel. I think we all were that particular time frame.
Back to the Agricultural Women's Club, were you ever involved with the scholarship efforts?
Yes, yeah, I was. Mm-hmm. I did that for several years. It was very interesting. I really enjoyed it, and it just, what that did was make me realize how much talent we had in these students. I was amazed then, and I'm still amazed when I have a granddaughter that recently graduated with her master's a couple of years ago in she works for St. Luke's in the kidney transplant section, and I read her resume, and it just amazes me what all young people are doing today. And it amazed me back then what all they did. I just thought it was fascinating, and how much they cared about what they did and why they did it. I get, we have a scholarship, Jim and I do, and I get letters every year from the students that have received them. And what they're doing is just incredible. It just makes you so proud of our young people. It's because we hear so much negative that it's nice to see the other side. Makes you really.
That was when you were reading scholarship applications for the women
Right.
scholarships and selecting
Correct.
winners, and you would see their accomplishments. Yes.
Their accomplishments were just outstanding, I think.
What about involvement with the fundraising for the scholarships, which were provided really out of the funds of the members' donations, but how did they do that?
I was never involved in that. I don't think.
I'm going to jog your memory, and this is an indirect involvement, but it certainly was important. I remember Christmas parties in particular where collections were being taken up to fund the scholarships, and what was the draw for people to donate?
I think they got some jewelry.
Yes, let's hear more. How did that happen?
Oh dear, that was crazy. You know, Jim won twice, and we've never won anything in our life, but one of the things was a pair of was a necklace that I still wear, and then he went and got the earrings to go with it, and the other was a necklace, a tennis necklace, not a tennis bracelet, a tennis necklace. It was pearls every so often. I wear that all the time. But that was embarrassing to him.
Well, winning, but Peg, I think the reason we had the jewelry in the first place, this was fine jewelry from a very fine jeweler.
From Klaus Jewelers.
And who solicited that donation from Klaus Jewelers?
We did. I did.
Okay.
I'd forgotten about that.
How did that happen? How did you manage to do that?
How did I manage to do that? Well, Jim was very generous with me with jewelry. I don't know why, except, growing up in Panama, you always wore jewelry to start with, because I had a lot of friends that just don't wear jewelry at all. And they asked me, why do you wear jewelry? And I never thought about not. And but I never had a diamond until we'd been married 30 years. And I remember when we got it, for some reason we went to Klaus, and I probably because it was close. It was right around the corner, more or less. You know, we lived in suburban Heights, and Klaus is there in Thornbrook, and so that's where he went. And we just developed a relationship, and just really did. So that's all I remember.
Well,
how it worked.
Because of that relationship, it turned out that you were able to solicit donations for a number of years. Yeah. And it became a big thing to
and they were very
have a raffle for those.
Yeah. they were very generous in that regard. They liked to do it, and I know the last time I went in there, which was after Jim passed away, to get something repaired, and they talked about that, about the fact that it gave them such pleasure to help. They felt honored to help to do that, and it. But I'd certainly forgotten all about that as far as it being a donation or anything. So.
Well, with all of that fun and orientation to the community and all that the club provided, how do you feel about the dissolution of the club at this point?
I think it probably had to happen. I think the clubs we had, they provided something that was very, very needed. And it may be needed now on a different level. But we saw such a decline in membership. After I moved here, our community changed. Our community at the university changed. Women went to work, were working more. And I think part of that, their social obligations were filled there where they worked. There was other responsibilities take over, and you probably had to spend more time when you were at home, being with your family or whatever. I just think our community changes, and I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I think it happens, and I think we saw that. We talked about it a lot. I remember distinctly one coffee I had at my house for new professors' wives, and we sent out, I don't know how many invitations, but a lot. And there were 2 women that came. And one of them just told me that she was there because her husband told her she needed to go. And as soon as she had her cup of whatever we were serving and a couple of cookies, I think she felt she had done her obligation and she left. And that just kind of made me think back then that because we were working hard to get people involved, and it became more and more difficult. And that I just remember that coffee. It kind of really made us stop and think. And Ag Women has done so much good, and with their scholarships and involvement of women, that I think has been really necessary. But I know women in other organizations here in town that are having the same issues. It's just, we've changed. There are other things that have replaced some clubs. And I in a lot of respects, I think it's a loss. But I think being older, we all think there are some things that were better than they are now. So, but that's not true either necessarily. So it's a good time to reflect and think.
Is there anything else about the Agricultural Women's Club that you'd like to add before we finish?
No, I really can't. I really can't think of anything. But I've really enjoyed this, and I was a little nervous about how it was going to go. But you're perfect for this, Kathy. You're very,
great
very
fun.
good. Very good.
But I'm not finished. I have one more question.
Oh,
Being in these extraordinary times, I'd like you to reflect a little on how the pandemic is affecting you and your family and your lifestyle.
well, I have been cautious in how I respond. For me, personally, it's been fine. It's better than fine. I have really been able to have time to reflect. And I've done a lot of it. I have been able to read a lot more. I have written a lot of things down that my girls have asked me to, stories and this type of thing. I'm outside as much as possible. I'm outside on my deck every morning, even when it's hot. I can sit out there, and as long as I don't move, I'm okay. It's been nice not having to have appointments, not to have to get up and rush around and go someplace, but just to walk around the neighborhood, get better acquainted with the neighbors. I've really it hasn't been bad for me at all, but that also may be because my children are all safe. They've all been able to continue working, whether it's at home, most of them, but they have jobs that they can do that. And I think it's given us time to reflect, to really think about what's important. We can lead pretty frazzled lives if we let ourselves. And I'm just really, I almost appreciate this time. I know we're going to have to, things probably will never be the same. I mean, when you go through something like this, things change. And a lot of things change for the better, I think. When you stop and think about World War II, look at the freedom that gave women, and just lots of different things I can think of that I think it's a time to reflect and try and keep ourselves busy, which I haven't had too much trouble with. But see, I'm also 82. And I think that makes a lot of difference. We look at things, well, we've been through a lot of experiences. And so I think it's easier on us. What do you think?
I think that's, you've put that very well, and I wish everybody could be as comfortable as we are at this retired stage of life to go through this. But what about not being able to see your family and travel? Is that hard?
Well, I haven't traveled a whole lot. I was traveling so much after Jim passed away. I took river cruises. We did Route 66. I traveled with a couple of girlfriends, and we did a lot of road trips going different places and going overseas. And that all was wonderful. It was fun. Last couple of years, I've had kidney cancer, and then I had another surgery I had to have after that. And so I've had to slow down somewhat. And I have slowed down, but I still travel in the States. And, but, I've never lived close to my family. I grew up not living close to family. All three of our girls live in Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. So, but this is that one thing about technology. FaceTime has just been wonderful. And they call, we can pick up the phone now and call 5 times a day if we want to. Whereas when I was in college, away from my folks, when I was 17, I talked to them once. I shared that with a group of college women not too long ago. They couldn't conceive how you could get through a day without calling your mom. And I said, it's a different world. That's all I could say. I didn't want to say we were more independent, that we were taught this way. I didn't want to say that, but I had to bite my tongue.
Well, thank you. There are many differences, and it's certainly fun to talk about them. So I thank you again. One more chance, if you think, is there anything else that?
No, I can't think of anything, Kathy, but this is so wonderful that you have done this. And it makes me, I'm going to Zoom. We have a Panamanian museum here at the University of Florida, and I keep getting notes telling me that they would like for me to do this, and I'm going to do it. I haven't done it, but I'm going to now.
Definitely.
Because of you.
No, thank you. You can see how valuable it is, as you say, the young people really don't know those things, and in the future it will be delightful to have heard about your upbringing and your wonderful experience in Panama and your life thereafter. So thanks a lot, Peg. I will now end this recording.